There were maybe 40 people in the room on the night of November 24th, 1991, when Freddie Mercury took his last breath. The house at One Garden Lodge, Logan Place, in the Kensington borough of London, had been closed to the world for nearly 2 years. The curtains were drawn, the phone lines were watched. The people inside understood, without being told, that what they knew was not to leave the building. And so it didn't. Not until he was already gone. His mother, Gerbil Sara, learned the truth that night. She had known her son was ill. She had known, the way mothers know things when they are not told directly, that the illness was serious. But the word had never passed between them. Not the diagnosis, not the name of the disease, not the 7 letters that would have made everything precise and also unbearable. She found out the same night as the rest of the world, and the rest of the world found out from a 1-paragraph statement released at midnight, composed in advance, delivered after the fact. He had kept it from her on purpose, not out of shame, not out of distance. He kept it from her because he loved her, and because he understood something about the particular cruelty of knowing versus not knowing. And he made a choice on her behalf that she never asked him to make. Whether she forgave him for it, whether forgiveness was even the right frame, is a question that has no clean answer. What is clear is this: Freddie Mercury spent the last 2 years of his life in a kind of sustained, deliberate act of protection that almost nobody outside his immediate circle knew was happening. He went on protecting people even as he was dying. He went on performing even when the stage was his own kitchen, his own garden, his own bed. The secret was not the diagnosis alone. The secret was everything that surrounded it. The decisions he made, the people he shielded, the things he refused to say publicly, the things he said privately only once, and the version of himself he chose to present to the world right up until the week he could no longer stand. To understand why a man would do this, you have to go back much further than 1991. You have to go back to a boy in Zanzibar who learned very early that certain truths were not safe to carry openly. Farrokh Bulsara was born on September 5, 1946, in Stone Town, Zanzibar, which was then a British protectorate. His father, Bomi, worked as a cashier for the British colonial government. His mother, Jur, was a woman of considerable quiet strength, the kind of person who ran a household as if it were a small and efficient country. The family was Parsi, members of a Zoroastrian community that had migrated from Persia to India centuries earlier and carried with them a fierce sense of cultural identity and religious practice. They were a tight, private family. They did not discuss the difficult things in open rooms. At 8 years old, Farrokh was sent to St. Peter's School, a British-style boarding school in Panchgani, India. He would not live at home with any permanence again. The separation from his parents, and especially from his mother at that age, shaped him in ways he would later speak about only obliquely. He was a gentle, artistic, somewhat solitary child who discovered that performance was a way to be seen without being known. On a stage or at a piano, he could give people something to look at that was not precisely himself. He learned the trick early, and he never stopped using it. He studied, he drew, he played piano obsessively, and he was, by every account of his school friends, already funny and strange and electric in person. He had a gap in his upper teeth caused by 4 extra incisors crowded behind the front ones, something he was self-conscious about his entire life. He almost never opened his mouth wide when he smiled in photographs. He would go on to build one of the most theatrical, open-mouthed, physically extravagant performance careers in the history of rock music, and he would spend decades doing it while quietly managing the particular insecurity of that gap. This is not a small thing. It tells you something about who he was, a man who turned every private wound into a performance. When he was 17, Zanzibar underwent a violent revolution. The Arab Sultanate was overthrown, and the violence was concentrated against Arab and mixed communities. The Bulsara family fled to England, eventually settling in Feltham, Middlesex, in a small house far from the Zanzibar they had known. Farrokh, already at school in India, joined them. The move was permanent. The life they had known was over. He enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic to complete his A-levels, then took a diploma in art and graphic design at Ealing Art College, which is the same college Pete Townshend attended. He worked at Heathrow Airport for a while, selling things at a stall. He was also, by this point, consuming music with an almost physical hunger. He saw Jimi Hendrix perform. He haunted record shops. He was becoming something, though the shape of it was not yet clear. He joined and left several bands, including one called Sour Milk Sea, before he met Brian May and Roger Taylor, who were at that point in a group called Smile. Their bassist, Tim Staffel, left, and Farrokh Bulsara stepped in. He also renamed the band and renamed himself Queen, Freddie Mercury. Both names were theatrical, mythological, slightly absurd, and completely intentional. He was not hiding behind them. He was constructing something. There is a difference. The early Queen years are now so well documented in retrospect that it is easy to forget how uncertain they were at the time. The band was nearly dropped by EMI. Their debut album was modest. They toured constantly, often in miserable conditions. Freddie threw himself into the work with an energy that his bandmates described as almost alarming. He had opinions about everything: the artwork, the costumes, the key of a song, the angle of a spotlight. He was controlling in the way that people are controlling when they are afraid that without constant vigilance, the whole thing will collapse. By 1975, with Bohemian Rhapsody, they had become something that didn't fit any existing category. The song was 6 minutes long. Radio programmers said it couldn't be played. Their label said it couldn't be released as a single. Freddie insisted, and the history of what happened next is too large to recount properly in this context, except to say that the song did exactly what he believed it would do, and that this moment established, once and for all, a certain fact about Freddie Mercury. He knew things about audiences that other people didn't know, and he was usually right. The public version of him, through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, was one of the greatest showmen in the world. The concerts at Madison Square Garden, the concert at Wembley in 1986, which was attended by 72,000 people, and is still cited by musicians who were there as the finest single live performance they have ever witnessed. The costumes, the mustache that replaced the costumes, the short hair and the leather and the white tank top that became its own kind of uniform. He moved through phases of his own image the way other people move through apartments, completely leaving nothing behind. But the private version was always more complicated and always more guarded. He was gay, or more precisely bisexual, in a period when that distinction mattered less than the broader fact that he desired men, and that this desire was not something he was prepared to discuss publicly. He lived in England during the years when homosexuality had only recently been decriminalized, when tabloid culture was ferocious and specific in its cruelty toward gay men in the public eye. He watched what happened to others. He drew conclusions. He made decisions about what he would share and what he would keep. His relationship with Mary Austin began in the early 1970s and lasted, in its romantic form, until he told her in 1976 that he was bisexual. She later described that moment as devastating. He described it years afterward as necessary. What followed the end of their romantic partnership was something rarer than the partnership itself, a friendship that held for the rest of his life, that deepened rather than dissolved, that became the central emotional relationship of his adult years. He bought her a house. He left her the majority of his estate. At the end, she was one of the very few people allowed past the gate at Garden Lodge. He told her things he told almost no one else. And even she, even Mary, did not know everything. The men he loved were loved privately. Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser who became his partner in the mid-1980s and who lived with him at Garden Lodge until the end, was rarely photographed alongside him, rarely identified by name in the press, rarely acknowledged in the public-facing version of Freddie's life. Not because Freddie was ashamed of him. By every account of the people who knew them, he was not. He was protecting him from exactly what he understood better than Jim did. In 1987, Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with HIV. The year matters. In 1987, an HIV-positive diagnosis was understood, medically and socially, as a death sentence with an uncertain timeline. The medications that have since transformed the disease into a manageable chronic condition did not exist. The stigma was staggering and specific. It was not simply a stigma against illness, but a stigma woven into homophobia and fear and the particular ugliness of the tabloid press in Britain in that decade. People were losing their jobs, their housing, their families. People were being photographed without consent, named without permission, identified against their will in publications that treated the diagnosis as punishment and the men dying of it as cautionary tales. He told almost no one. He told his closest bandmates, Brian May and Roger Taylor and John Deacon, within a couple of years of the diagnosis, though accounts differ slightly on exactly when. He told Mary Austin, he told Jim Hutton, he told his manager, John Reed, and later Jim Beach, who took over management. He did not tell his parents. He did not tell his sister, Kashmira. He did not make any public statement. He kept working. Between 1987 and 1991, Queen recorded The Miracle and Innuendo, 2 full albums. Freddie wrote songs, sang on them, pushed through the sessions on days when the physical effort of standing required planning and recovery. The band accommodated him without making an issue of it, filming his performances in short blocks when his energy allowed, adapting the pace of recording to the reality of his body without publicly acknowledging what the reality was. The photographs from that period are striking when you know what you are looking at. He was thin. His face had changed. He wore more layers in public, more hats, more jackets. He gave his last interview in 1989 and deflected every question about his health with the particular skill of a man who had spent his entire career deciding exactly what to let people see. The press suspected. The tabloids ran speculation for years before the end. He denied it, or declined to confirm it, or changed the subject with a joke. This was not dishonesty in the ordinary sense. It was control, exercised deliberately, by a man who had spent his life being controlled by almost nothing else. The question of why he kept the secret from his mother has no single answer, and the people who knew him well have given different versions of it over the years. The most common explanation is that he was protecting her from pain she could not act on or change. To tell her was to ask her to carry something that would not alter the outcome, only alter every remaining day. He could spare her that, and so he did. Whether she would have wanted to be spared is a different question entirely. His relationship with Jair Bulsara was deep and complicated in the way that the relationship between a gay Parsi son and his traditional mother is always going to be deep and complicated. She loved him completely. He loved her completely. They talked regularly, saw each other, maintained the warmth of a family that had been close since the early days in Zanzibar, through the upheaval of the revolution, through the strange new life in England. She attended some of his concerts. She was proud of him in the uncomplicated way of parents who can see their child's talent without needing to understand all of its dimensions. He did not tell her he was gay, not in any direct form. He did not tell her about Jim Hutton, not in the way you tell a parent about a partner. She knew in the way that people who love someone very closely and very long know things that have not been said directly. But she never asked, and he never offered. And they lived inside that particular silence for decades. The decision not to tell her about the HIV then was not a single decision. It was a continuation of a practice he had been maintaining for 20 years. He had been protecting her from precise knowledge about his private life, for as long as his private life had been his private life. The AIDS diagnosis was one more precise thing he did not name. In the last months, Garden Lodge became its own quiet world. Jim Hutton was there. Mary Austin visited constantly and eventually moved into the garden house to help with care. Dave Clark, a close friend, was there often. Peter Freestone, who had been Freddie's personal assistant for years, was there. The household functioned with extraordinary order around a man who was dying because the people in it were determined that he would not experience it as dying for as long as he could experience it as something else. He apparently still dressed well on the days he was able. He still sat in the garden when the weather allowed. He had a cook who prepared his meals, and he had opinions about the meals. He kept as many of the textures of his ordinary life in place as the disease would permit. And when the disease stripped one texture away, the people around him tried to replace it with something he could still do. He was, by many accounts, remarkably controlled about what was happening to him. Not in the sense of denial. He knew exactly what was happening. But he had decided how he was going to face it, and he faced it in the manner he chose. He was in pain and he was sometimes frightened, and he was also, apparently, often funny. The people who were there for that period describe someone who was still, in some essential way, performing. Not falsely, just in character. The statement released after his death on November 24, 1991, confirmed that he had died of bronchopneumonia resulting from AIDS. The statement was crafted in advance, by him, with his approval. He dictated the terms of the disclosure the way he had dictated everything else. He would tell the world on his own terms, at his own moment, and not before. What he never did was explain himself. He never gave an interview in those final years in which he described what he was going through, or why he was keeping it private. He did not write about it. He did not apparently express particular regret about the decision to stay quiet, or particular anxiety about how the silence would be interpreted after his death. The interpretation, when it came, was wide and various. Some people read the silence as shame. Some read it as dignity. Some read it as the natural behavior of an intensely private person who happened to live a public life, and who understood, more clearly than most, that the two are not the same thing. Some read it as the behavior of a man who had spent his entire adult life navigating a culture that was hostile to what he was, and who had learned that the only protection available was the one you built yourself. The songs offer something, though the songs have always offered something oblique. Who Wants to Live Forever, which he recorded in 1986, a year before his diagnosis, sounds different when you know what was coming. The Show Must Go On, recorded in 1990, is a song about performing past the point of endurance, and he sang it on the recording even though Brian May was not certain he could physically do it, and he did it in one take, and it is the most heartbreaking thing he ever put on tape. But to read these songs as confessions is to simplify them. He was also writing songs about other things. He was always writing about more than one thing at once. What he left behind was, by his own design, carefully incomplete. The music is there, all of it, the sheer volume of it staggering when you actually count. The performances are preserved on film and video, and what those recordings show is someone who understood the relationship between a human body and a room of people in a way that almost no one else has before or since. The private correspondence, the journals if there were any, the conversations that happened in the rooms at Garden Lodge in those final years, those belong to the people who were there. He made sure of that. His estate went largely to Mary Austin, to Jim Hutton, to Peter Freestone, and to his family. Garden Lodge was willed to Mary. He asked her, specifically, not to reveal where his ashes were interred. She has kept that secret for more than 30 years. She says she will keep it forever. He trusted her with the last private fact of his existence, the location of his body, and she has honored it. Jair Bulsara, his mother, spoke publicly a handful of times after his death. She spoke about missing him. She spoke about his generosity, about the money he gave to his family throughout his life, about the presents, about the phone calls. She spoke with a mother's particular grief, which is a grief that does not simplify. She did not, in the accounts that have been published, speak bitterly about the secret he kept. Whether she understood it, whether she agreed with the reasoning, whether she would have made a different choice if given one, those are her things to carry, and she has not given them to anyone. He was 45 years old when he died. By most calculations, at the pace he was moving, he should have recorded another decade of music and filled another decade of stadiums. The calculation is useless, but people keep doing it, because the absence is still specific and sharp enough to make you want to measure it. The secret he kept was not, in the end, only about fear or shame or protection. It was about authorship. He had authored himself, carefully and deliberately, from the moment he chose the name Freddie Mercury. From the moment he stood in front of a crowd for the first time and understood what he could do to a room. He authored the music. He authored the performances. He authored the image through every phase of it, from the jumpsuit to the mustache to the last public appearances in which he looked diminished and still somehow larger than everyone else on camera. He authored the silence. He authored the statement released after midnight on November 24th. He authored the location of his ashes by trusting it to the one person he knew would keep it. Whether any of us, knowing all of this, feels closer to him or further from him is probably a measure of what we wanted from him in the first place. The people who wanted a confession will not find one. The people who wanted a performance will find only that it never quite ended. His mother sat with him as he died, she knew at that moment, finally, precisely what she had probably known or in outline for years. She held whatever she felt about that night inside herself, the way her son had held things, the way their whole family had learned to hold things, in the manner of people who understand that some truths are not diminished by remaining unspoken. The curtains stayed drawn. The gate at Garden Lodge stayed closed. And Freddie Mercury, who had spent 45 years deciding exactly what he would and would not show the world, finished the performance on his own terms.